Hi guys, welcome to Live in the Dark, which I am once again doing kind of in the dark. See, I kind of set this up. It's like once again a nighttime show. We have a very special guest tonight, but before we bring him on, it's gonna be kind of a shortened episode, so I want you guys to know that. We're probably gonna do not as long as we normally do, and so we're gonna just jump right into the topic this week. But if you guys want to donate, it's streamlabs.com/Videodrew. Videodrew is one word. Hey Dagan, hey Brennan. Hey, some new faces. Hey, Ken. This is some fans of Coy right here. So yeah, let's just bring on the man himself. It is the one, the only, the comic book master, Coy Jandreau.
How's it going?
How are you?
I am excited to be here in the dark.
Yeah, it is. It is in the dark. I feel like this is appropriate for our topic at hand. I can
adjust.
There we go.
One of these spooky but lit.
So what I like about this is I'm already seeing some people here that are like not my normal viewership, which is good because my normal viewership is probably sick to death of hearing me talk about Midnight Mass. But maybe yours is not sick of talking about Midnight Mass yet.
I think they've only seen a couple tweets, a couple, one positive, one sassy at those not positive. That's all I've really.
Really, I didn't even. What does this sass one say?
My sassy one was, what was it? It was, I've seen a lot of negative comments about the monologues, and your lack of attention span doesn't mean it's bad writing.
Dude, I feel the same way. So, guys, if you haven't seen it, Midnight Mass is Mike Flanagan's new show. It's the guy who did Haunting of Hill House. He did Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. He did Gerald's Game, that's also on Netflix. He's done a bunch of things. I don't know. I really liked Ouija Origin of Evil, which he also did, and Oculus. He's a horror director who has a lot of like deep, interesting takes on just, I don't know. I think I would call it kind horror or like you know, sort of a comfort horror almost. Like it is very meditative.
Whatever the opposite of torture porn is while still being in the horror genre.
Thank you. That's exactly what it is. It's whatever the opposite of torture porn is, to the extent that this show, I don't think it even has that much like violence.
But all the violence is like animal based and really breaks me.
Yeah. So Coy, were you like a fan of? Were you a Flana fan?
I was a big Flana fan, which is actually why I jumped on it. I was a big Flana fan, and I also have been really trying to find gateways into horror that I feel like are the approachable horror, which is why I'm a fan of his. I generally struggle with dark content because the world's so dark. Like I know a lot of people get catharsis out of it. I know a lot of people find certain redemptive qualities in the credits rolling after they've had a traumatic event. But I think the way I stay so positive is I don't add horror to my mental Rolodex, because I watch the news and I'm aware of the world, and I'm not being like hyperbolic when I say it. It tarnishes my reality to add more to that. And I do think we're living through pretty unprecedentedly shitty times. Not maybe as bad as other people see it or not as good, but like I don't think we need to add trauma if you view the world like I do. So I generally find positive context way for me to keep my overall optimistic worldview. But I also don't want to be someone that's like writing off an entire genre. Like I don't think it's fair to a genre that has so much merit, so much artistic integrity, so many fans that cross over with mine. I don't think it's fair of me to go, nah. So I find his work is a great middle ground for me to appreciate without having to dive into stuff that makes me uncomfortable.
It's so funny to hear you say that, because not to derail this convo we're having, but my ex-husband is a news anchor for a major news outlet, very positive person like yourself, and also will not even go steer near anything that might be remotely horror, because I think his outlook is just like he needs to stay like positivity is so hard to come by, and being a positive person is like a genuinely positive person is so hard to come by. But this is something I would have liked to show to him as well, because I think it's just, I don't want to say like it's smart TV, but it's definitely like deep television. Like this is meditative television.
Oh, I think it's wicked smart. I think it's a great way to get people that aren't in the space to like. Do you know who Yellow Wolf is?
No.
Yellow Wolf is a rapper I love, and he's got like a country bent to him. He's from Alabama. He plays like he's got hip hop over banjos. Like there's a song called Fiddle Me This where he's literally rapping over fiddles. And I don't particularly like country music, but it's a great way if someone likes country for me to go like, hey, I identify with you through this. Like it's a nice Venn diagram center. And I feel like Flanagan is a really beautiful center between like thrillers and psychological things to horror. So it's like the gateway between Fincher and James Wan, or the gateway between, like, and that's why I appreciate it.
I mean, so were you like what did you go in? I mean, before we get into the religious stuff, if anyone hasn't seen the show on Netflix, we are going to probably get into spoilers. We'll try to give you a spoiler before we get into anything too hard. But what was your sort of take? Had you seen any trailers for this show? Like, did you have a sort of a concept of what it was going to be before you got into it?
I actually avoided every bit of footage. Because with comic book content and with most of the stuff I cover, I'm covering it so heavily that by the time I see it, it's kind of like putting together scenes between the scenes I've seen that drives me insane. Like I don't get the benefit of enjoying comic book movies the first time very often. I'm usually like, if I see 20 minutes of footage and it's a 100-minute movie, I'm like, well, let me put together the comic book plus the things I've seen. And you kind of, so for this, I was like, I don't know a lot about religious myths. I don't know a lot about horror, and I don't know a lot about this property. So I want to avoid anything so I can have a full new 8 hours. I want to have seen nothing. And I'm a big fan of the people behind it, so I knew I trusted them. And then everyone I respect in the horror space loved it. So I was like, okay, I don't need to see anything. I'm going to trust Perry and everyone else. And so I just dove in. It was wonderful because I didn't have to go like, oh, that scene I saw. Like, it was all fresh.
Now, this is actually really interesting. So you don't know that many horror tropes, and you also don't know, you said, that many religious tropes. So there's like certain words that are not used in the entirety of this show. Interesting for the lack of them. Like they never mentioned the word Catholic on the show, except like this clearly is a Catholic community. The guy is a Monsignor priest. The whole thing is very coded like sacrament. It's all about, the holy transitional property with transubstantiation. Like when you're supposed to drink the blood of Christ and eat the wafer and stuff. Being Jewish and growing up Jewish, like all that stuff already seems so freaky to me. But I mostly learned about it through the horror space because it is like The Exorcist. And a lot of times TV shows and movies will code like horror stuff as being like, you can banish evil by, this is The Conjuring. This is anything with the Warren family in it, the whole Conjuring verse, which is like, you can banish evil by using like the power of the Catholic Church. And what I knew about this show going into it was like, it was going to be the opposite of that. Or at least it seemed like it was. It seemed like it was about an evil priest who comes to town and sort of sweeps the town up in sort of a religious fervor that might turn out to be somewhat malevolent or like, part of a dark mass or something evil like that. So I was trying to pick up those cues because I do the same thing as you. The show, and I guess this is where we can start getting into spoiler territory, it was not anti-religious and was not anti the Catholic Church and was not necessarily anti anything. So, I mean, what were you sort of picking up on when you were watching the first couple episodes? What did you think was going on?
In the very beginning, how do I preface anyone that is religious? I have no qualms, and I just don't particularly practice. So anything I say isn't a slight at you. It's just my experience. So with that being said, while watching it, I was really worried that I would have no context for what was going on because of how removed I am. Because the first episode, there's so much jargon, there's so much Latin effectively that I was just like, will I get this show? Like, is this one of those things where you need to have read the books, so to speak? In this case, that book's a big testament. Like, I didn't know if I was going to have the exposure. So I was a little worried because I was in love with the language and I was in love with the characterization. I was in love with all those things, but I was worried I wouldn't get it. So in the very beginning, I was like, oh, is this going to be something that I can appreciate? But then by the second episode, renting out the chessiest and goriest feet I find at 12 years old. I'm pumped. The first two were creepy as fuck, though.
That was a comment. Sorry, I should have been like, pause. That was a comment. Thank you so much from Mighty Fucks. I said that out loud in that way, but thank you for tipping. I think he was talking about horror movies for a second. I can pull up that comment.
Read that out.
I will bring that up. Sorry, say what you were saying again, and I will.
Oh, I was just saying I was worried the language wouldn't translate, but then the characterization was so strong, it was actually gave me enough interest that I was more invested in discerning what they were trying to say. Like I was so good that I was like, let me do a little bit of research to get these references, which I know I keep bringing it back to comic books, but that's my space. That's kind of what I hope good comic book movies do. It made me go like, hey, you should read the book. I haven't read the Bible because of this, but I have looked at some of the things and some of the things they're referencing because of this. And I think that's what good art can do.
I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think one of the strange things about this show is that it can make you actually want to check out religion more than like you already have. Like this show is very much about like how religion is a tool more than anything. Like they have a speech during one of the characters' AA meetings about how alcohol isn't good or bad. It's sort of like in Arrival, how they have this word that they're trying to translate and they can't figure out if it means weapon or tool. And that's sort of like what they're getting at here, which is religion is by itself just a neutral thing. It doesn't have a good or bad connotation. It just is what people interpret it to be, and people can weaponize it in awful ways and use it to like, to just bash other people in and sort of be bigots. But it can also be this great source of comfort and coming togetherness in the community. And sometimes it can be both at the same time. And I was just like, woof. This is both like way more positive towards religion than I thought it was ever going to be, and a big condemnation of how people can sometimes use it. And I thought that was like a brilliant statement.
I think any zealot is going to be problematic, and I think that tool is like, with like drinking is a great parallel, and I love that they used it so succinctly. But like, it's good to have a couple drinks if you enjoy that vice, but it's really dangerous to have like 12 drinks if you can't handle that vice. And I think that with religion, it's something that like, get a buzz on, get your Jesus buzz, but also like, don't get Jesus hammered and kill people.
Don't get Jesus hammered to kill you, which is what brings us to a good point. I will read the comment. I just found it up. So this is from Mighty PHUKS. Are you guys excited for VHS 94? I love the first two, but the new one reminds me of going to an old video store and renting out the cheesiest and goriest BS I could find at 12 years old. I'm pumped. The first two were creepy as though. I feel like I'm excited for VHS 94. I did not know they were doing one like this, but Coy, not being a horror fan, might not be.
I didn't know it existed, but I am very happy that there's an entirely new anthology based on stuff from Blockbuster, because I know I love that stuff in different genres, and I'm sure there's an entire. I imagine this is going to make a lot more people very happy. So that's all I care about, it, people being happy.
I mean, I do like the VHS franchises because it is like, it's using like analog anthology. So it's like looking through an old, like, Faces of Death or something, like this old VHS tape that's like a cursed tape. But going back to what I was saying earlier, or what I was about to say, is like, I think specifically doesn't use specific words like Catholic. It also doesn't use a specific word that I think a lot of people probably come to mind when they watch this whole program through. And this is kind of going to be where we get a little bit spoilery. But like, do you know what that word is, Coy? Yeah, it's vampires.
I was so impressed because I really expected that to be like a last minute, like last episode, like blah, blah. But I like that it didn't weaponize that word, because it allows this to be the myth that it's meant to be. I think that it allows the creature to be that interpretive creature, because, that is in that worldview an angel. And I think that's a fucking beautiful side by side.
So, yeah, I don't watch the show The Walking Dead, but apparently in The Walking Dead, nobody refers to anything as zombies because they live in like an alternate reality where zombie culture never existed. There was no George Romero. There was no Night of the Living Dead or like 28 Days Later. So that's why they call them walkers. And that's why they kind of have to learn the rules from scratch. And that's a really good device for both, I'm sure, the comic and the movie, in that you get to recreate the rules and have people be like, well, how does that work without sounding dumb or without having to make a bunch of pop culture references of being like, well, don't you understand? It's just like this, but times this. Because every time you make anything that's horror, you have to kind of build the mythology from scratch. And what this does is sort of be like, well, what if that mythology didn't exist, and it didn't exist in a very religious community? So their interpretation of what we would very clearly be like, well, that sucks blood and lives in the dark. And like when it sucks your blood, you suddenly get very powerful and can't go in the sunlight. We'd be like, that's a vampire. And there's a certain point where in the show, the blood starts, boiling in the doctor's office. And she's like, oh, I guess this is some kind of virus. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a world where this just doesn't exist. Because that's the point where you just be like vampires.
And I really love that the way they leaned into it was by doing the scientific approach without it feeling so cheesy. Like, I really, really enjoyed that. It felt like, one, it wasn't in a universe that had it, but two, I bought the scientific mumbo jumbo because it was delivered with such earnest heart that it didn't feel like some movies that try to go like, shh, vampire, and make up rules. Like, it didn't feel like a cheesy 80s vampire movie where they were trying to invent an alternative. It just felt like the world.
And it's very cool. Like Mike's saying, they never mentioned the word the devil. They barely mention the word sin, and they only use sin in context of this one character, Bev, who's like, it's sin to, she's just kind of using it to bludgeon people. But this is a world in which religion and your relationship to religion is much more. It's almost like I think of it as a very Judaic idea, which is like your relationship to religion is your relationship to God and sort of how you feel about your community, and it's not really about using it to like be like scare you into thinking of something. So of course, like a priest who's who comes across one of these things and who's able to turn him young again would see something with wings and like be like, that's an angel. Like, why wouldn't that be an angel? Why would that necessarily be evil? Because I think we interpret so much as Catholic stuff as being like fear of hell, fear of death, like fear of Satan or whatever. And it's very cool that this was like very much not that. It's not that at all.
I also like that last sequence describing the afterlife was so not only incredibly written, but so open-ended. Like the interpretation of each of their parallel deaths is so religion friendly, but also agnostic friendly. Like it allows for all these different interpretations, because I hate when things tell me how to feel. I like when things allow me to feel, and this allows me to feel so many different ways without ever being a religious like beatdown. I feel like Mike Flanagan was able to do what he preached while preaching what to do. Like he was able to be his own alcohol and religion or tools.
Yeah, I feel like this show was very much like trying to have a conversation, in the sense that there are some like very quick scenes in this. There's like people, because it's all about this community. It's very Stephen King like, in that the whole community gets shown and everyone's doing their different things. But then it will stop and just have like one long take of like two people. A lot of the show is just two people having a conversation, no matter which two people it is. And a lot of times that conversation is very theological. It's like, what do we think about what happens when we die? And it's just like, what do we think death is? What do we think God is? What do we think like impulse and desire is? And what do we think, our purpose here on earth is for? And for a horror show, like, or horror movie or horror anything, death is always the abject terror, right? It is just death is the moment that you transform from being yourself into being something that's terrifying and ungodly and needs to be like destroyed. And I think what this show does really well is talk to you about not the afterlife, because again, like you said, it's not really concerned about like the afterlife in terms of where your soul goes or what, something like that. It's way more concerned with, I think, the moment of death and how scared everyone is to be alone in that moment. And what I think that end monologue that Katie Siegel delivers so brilliantly is just about how you don't need to fear the moment of death or your own death. And you can walk into it sort of like the characters at the end walk into the light, sort of as a community, or as like the sense of, being sort of one with the universe. And that's just like not something you ever hear. It would be hard to hear in any other type of movie without being like
that monologue doesn't live many places, and his doesn't really either without the juxtaposition of hers. Like I love that his was like a very scientific based perspective, but it didn't feel heavy-handed because it was juxtaposed with what the show is. And like that's why I like the monologue so much. That's why I got so pissed that so many people were picking on the length of these speeches. Is to me this is just another form of storytelling, like just like Aaron Sorkin or shoot, the writer, she's amazing, Amy Sherman Palladino, or Kevin Smith. Any of these writers that have a style, I think a stylistic writing choice is way more important than following some format that bores us to death.
I mean, there is a very funny tweet up. I think I retweeted, of this guy whose thing is, it's a little video. Oh, hold on. We got another one of these.
Hi, Coy. Looking forward to hopefully meeting you in person in New York on Saturday. Can't wait to see those matches.
Oh.
Rookie of the Year is possibly on the line in the Josh versus Griffin match, and Marisol looking to defend the title as huge.
I can't tell if you guys can hear that or not, but if you could, and I will read that aloud again. That was from Dagan. Thank you, Dagan. He said, hi, Coy. Looking forward to meeting you in person in New York on Saturday. Can't wait to see those matches live. Rookie of the Year is possibly on the line in Josh versus Griffith match, and Marisol looking to defend the title is huge. I mean, geez, yeah.
It's going to be insane, no matter what Saturday is. I mean, I'm so excited for a live event with fans. I'm so excited for one. I've known of Josh for like 5 years. I've known Josh for a year. I'm excited to meet Josh.
I mean, I interviewed for a job with Josh back in like 2011 when he was at MTV.
Amazing.
And like Griffin and I share so many of the same friends that like literally he came over the other night to do an episode, and then afterwards he was like meeting up with a friend of mine from like a couple years ago, haven't seen in years, who's now running Adam McKay's podcast thing. So we just all went out for drinks, and I was like, we just know so many of the same people that I can't wait to see this match live. And of course, Marisol.
LA is this big. It's absurd. It really is. And I love that.
Erica's saying it came through the mic, not the stream. Okay, so I'll try to fix that. But back to this show for a second, because again, we're only going to have a little bit of time with you, and I do want to talk about this. Was there anything? I guess my feeling about this was sort of like a backdoor actual let's have a conversation America and people in the world. Like, this was a real show where even the bad character, even like the character with the least good intentions, still sat there and like would have a conversation with somebody who ideologically, you know, the Muslim sheriff, like, is not on the same page as her. Like, and she's the one who uses religion as a cudgel, and she still is a rational player in this game. Like, she's not a great person, and there's definitely some horrible things she does over this course of the show, some of which are incredibly subtle and like kind of confusing, like the poison stuff. But I think that like what the show is sort of like a backdoor, let's be all kind to each other. It's almost like a Mr. Rogers messaging in here, dressed up as being like a horror story.
I think it's really important that we tell ultra-violent stories as a means to peace. I think getting people's attention, I think that's my biggest thing is if the more we close our ears to people that see the other way, the least likely we'll get progress. And I think that's why politics have fallen apart to such a level, is misinformation and tribalism are the things that are destroying us. And tribalism happens when we stop listening to the other side. So I do think it's problematic when we give certain people platforms, but I also think that it's problematic when we don't give them a place to have their opinion justified, or like a dialogue versus monologue. We're very good at monologuing as a culture. We're very bad at dialoguing. So I think it's really great that this is a show about violence, to gather people that might see the world one way to describe peace, because they might go like, oh, I've learned through these characters that saw it to this 11. I see it at an 8. Oh, wait, maybe I'm more of an 11 than I thought. And like, I think we're cripplingly Islamophobic in this country. And I think it's a really beautiful thing that we have something as tricky to discuss as devout religion, discuss a thing like a character being Muslim in a positive sense, because there are so many characters that are just dismissed under that one, like you're one thing, you're one color, you're one whatever. And it's really gross how we treat an entire religion in this country. So I love that it was addressed here.
Raul Cali is incredible. Like, he's just like he's becoming like one of my favorite online Twitter presence.
He's
like
incredible.
He's one of the best people on Twitter, but he's also incredible in this role. And, you know, I think you hit on something, which is a lot of people talk about the monologues, how long the monologues are, but they aren't monologues. These are all dialogues that people just are having with each other. No one's saying this alone in a room. No one's shouting this at each other. They are all listening. They're all taking turns speaking, and they're all hearing what the other person is saying during these long sort of like speeches, but they're never just speeches that are just like, and here's like what this person thinks, and then end of scene. It's always, well, like having a conversation. Especially in that scene, I think that's really noticeable is in the scene with like the Bev, who is sort of like the Dolores Umbridge, like Nurse Ratched sort of figure in the church. And she's definitely I think the antagonist of the show, but she's sitting there in the school having this dialogue with Raul Cali's sheriff character, who they keep calling Sharif because they're sort of Islamophobic. And also it's not clear if that's maybe his first name. I know it's not his last name, but he's mad because
I think it was literally just a racist take on sheriff, because I think his first name is said a couple times and it was like a normal last name that I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, it's weird to me that this guy decided to move to this community that's an island full of Catholic people, like 0 non-Catholics on this island, non-practicing Catholics. But it's a conversation. It's really interesting because she's started bringing the Bible to school and handing out Bibles during class, and his son, who is Muslim, got one. And he's having this conversation, trying to explain to her why this is so inappropriate. And she's like, well, he starts talking about like Muslim religion and how Muslim believe in Jesus Christ, but they believe that Jesus was maybe, you know, different, that maybe the word of God had gotten corrupted through the different texts. And she's trying to say, well, this is not appropriate to say right now. And he's going, exactly, that's my point. This is not the appropriate forum. And they kind of go back and forth about this. And it's not what you would think, which is you would think that a normal show would have him make the moral high ground argument and her sort of get like owned, and that's the end of the scene. But instead, he kind of makes his argument, and then she responds like in this very like rational, it's not the best faith argument, but she responds in a very like logical way, which is he says like, what would you feel like if we brought the Quran to school and like started handing it out? Like, you would run me out of town. And her response is like, I really am sad that you think that about me. And like, no, we wouldn't. And it's a bad faith argument, but she's not like yelling at him over DM and like, you know what I mean? Like, so much of what we think of as discourse in this country is not actually discourse. It is just yelling at each other while plugging our ears, you know?
That moment I definitely took as her being manipulative by saying that, and she actually wouldn't practice it. But I do agree that is a much more hopeful version of reality than the one we live in, which is a terrifying thought. Like the fact that I would rather have someone dismissively agree in like in a way that's clearly probably lying. That's at least better than the passive aggressive way we treat so many people in this country.
I mean, I totally agree. It's a totally bad faith argument because, you know, she goes on to do all these undermining things about being like, well, if it was appropriate to read any of the Quran, but like, oh, hey, the Old Testament's also got some inappropriate stuff. It's totally bad faith. But what it is it is civil.
Yeah,
and like,
which is the
civil.
thing about this script that is so beautiful. Like, did you watch Ted Lasso?
Yes.
So Ted Lasso, there's this amazing ability to not ever have cynicism. There's nothing cynical in the humor. Everything manages to be just on the upfront. To me, I feel like they did a writer's pass of this script and took out all of the things that weren't bluntly true on the surface. Like this stayed on a very like, this is right here for us. And I thought that was a really beautiful take with this villain, because everything she said, you believe she believed. And I feel like there was at least a couple writing passes of like the Bev take on this scenario.
You're right. Because I think the thing that I've had the most issue with while like trying to rewatch this show is sort of what happened to the priest. There's one part where he's performing miracles using using vampire/angel blood, but he's alive. He's been restored from being an old man with dementia to being a young man, but he's able to walk in the sun. Then something happens to him that's very similar to something that happens earlier in the show where a dog is poisoned. Bev is the only character we ever see touching poison, and she touches it a lot over the course of the show. But like when and why she would have poisoned this priest so he has to die and then come back as more vampiric is like very confusing to me. And I think you're right. I think there was probably a pass where that's more explained, or her motivations are made a little bit more sinister. But they decided like they didn't really need that for her. Like she's a zealot, but she's also like a community person, and she really does believe what she's saying. It's kind of what makes those characters so scary. The Nurse Ratchets, the Umbridges, is that they believe in like this sort of, we put them in the lawful evil category, but they believe in what they are saying. And that's what makes them so dangerous a lot of times.
And that's why I think it's so important in this country to have dialogues with people like that, because if they're only yelling to their own echo chamber, they only get reinforced more and more and more that they're true. Like they only get more and more sure that they're right. And that's not going to change if we don't have these conversations. And that's really difficult to explain to people. Like I personally think that about a year ago, Joe Rogan was still in a place of listening to both sides and trying to have a platform. And I think over time, maybe that got corrupted is too strong of a word, but I think over time he maybe only has a certain perspective on, and it's affected his overall worldview. But I think what he set out to do in the very beginning was to actually listen to both sides. And we don't really have a lot of people with that platform right now. And it's a really important thing. Because I try to read books from both sides of the political spectrum. I try to like understand both parties. That way there isn't just this giant red-blue problem. And that's only going to get worse if people are yelling into their own CNN versus Fox problem. No matter how extreme I lean one way, and I do lean pretty extreme one way, it's scary when people are just like, nope.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy to think like I would have bought this movie as being plausible to live in this reality as of 5 years ago. But like in this reality, I have to believe the vampires don't exist. Trump was never president. COVID, where everyone is like, believes in like miracles. Like we watched a girl like who's in a wheelchair begin to walk. And what you were saying, I think about Joe Rogan's especially an apt comparison, because after 2 years almost of this pandemic, we have all become like, what's the word? Sequestered, like in a way that is very like monk-like, and becomes very much like, I don't know, I imagine it's kind of the same as being a celebrity. It's kind of the same thing as probably being like a priest or someone of very high standing in the community, where we've only gotten to hear people who agree with us. Like that's the only, because we're not around in society. We're not walking around in our jobs. We're not having to interact with people who don't already agree with what we say, unless it's just to like yell at them. Like there's nobody forcing us to have interactions with baristas or, conversations with our neighbors or anything like that. So we've all become sort of in an echo chamber. I know that word's used a lot, but I think and it's only
going to get worse, because once the world reopens, we've already established these really strong perspectives on everything that's happened to the point where we're not going to be willing to change what we've thought for 2 years. The longer this goes on, the more we get indoctrinated into our own ideals. And I think the more we stay on our same little corners of internet, it's really dangerous. Like, I love that TikTok has an algorithm that's so strong that I feel like I can swipe and just have my own party. Like, I think the TikTok algorithm is right next to AI. Like, I feel like TikTok's going to start AI before Skynet does. It's scary because it knows me so fucking well. But I do fear that the more successful that is, the more successful it becomes on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And then all of a sudden, the only thing we experience is through this little screen I'm looking at you on. And frankly, I more and more worry where Coy Jandreau ends and at Coy Jandreau begins. I feel like my little hat symbol is right here now. And I don't know when I start and when my digital self ends. And I think that's going to be a problem going forward. And every generation is going to get worse.
Wow, mind blown, Coy. Like, way to describe like the at Videodrew conundrum to a T. But also, like, I think that's exactly right. Sometimes I go on Facebook and I'm always confused because we hear about how Facebook is so toxic, but I don't know if the algorithm has always screened stuff for me or if my interests are just so much like, here's a weird thing I've gotten into and like now I've gone ham on Pokemon or like whether, but like my feed has never, I feel like my feed has never gone toxic. I live in the midnight mass version of Facebook. So like nobody's like yelling at each other. No one's spewing nonsense garbage and like discussions as far as I disagree with like high school people I knew or my mom's friend Barb or something is always remained on the socially respectable level. And I don't know why I get the pass on this, but I feel like it's very
I'm jealous.
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with Facebook, but it won't show me any of the bad stuff.
Facebook hasn't caught up to yours yet, but I don't use mine that often, which is maybe why it doesn't, because I feel like whenever I scroll through Facebook, if I see something like that, I tend to close it. So maybe Facebook has learned if I see that shit, I'm out. So it's more and more giving me like, here's a puppy.
Here's a puppy. I mean, I'm part of a lot of Facebook groups, so maybe that's it. So I'm never really sure if I know somebody or if this is just like a funny meme. But like, you know, I was with somebody who, and we're going to wrap it up like in the next couple of minutes so we can get you out of here. But I was with somebody for a couple years who, and this is on me for doing this, but like I was with somebody who was very much into Joe Rogan, the red pill community, like was one of these toxic Star Wars and Marvel and DC fans, like just totally somebody that on paper, there's no connective tissue, but like it was due to like circumstances and a lot of stuff. And when I look back on it, I was like, I kind of forced myself to be in conversation with somebody whose viewpoints on basically just every single thing run antithetical to what I believe is like a human being. And I wonder sometimes if that kind of made me a better or worse, or just again, like a tool, like more neutral person. Like I wonder because I have seen like other people's arguments. I do know the mindset of like, you know, Ray is like a Mary Sue and like, you know, screw everybody for making this all SJW and the whole thing, like I feel like it's easy to sum it all up as like, this is all toxic, you know, far right conspiracy theory, anti-vax, but it's all different things, right? Like
what scares me is how we as I mean, I think it's pretty obvious how left-leaning we both are. But like how we must seem to people that would not give us the time of day if we're not giving these people the time of day. Like I'd say we're in the top 15% leaning one extreme. And I assume everyone thinks we're just like doing tons of drugs with our craziness at all times and punching babies and drinking their blood. And frankly, I don't think blood sounds that tasty. So I don't know how extreme we are to the other side. So I try to at least give people a 3 strikes rule. I try to give people at least like 3 points of conversation before I'm just like done. But I think that's a lost art. I think we're losing the ability to have discourse. And I think this show, more than most, is about discourse on a macro scale. And it's dealing with very sensitive subject matter like religion and violence and zealousy and afterlife and loss and abortion and murder. Like it's genius, but it deals with only the most sensitive shit. And it does it with like kid gloves while being hyper aggressive. It's beautiful.
I mean, this is, I would say, the only piece of art that has ever made me want to go, oh, well, actually, why do people become priests? Like, why these people, like, always in pop culture, priests are either, like, evil or they're, like, pedophiles or they're, you know, secretive and protective or they're, like, saintly. And they're just, like, they just come in at the last minute and save the day and do the prayer and, like, everyone's saved. There's never, like, a nuanced portrayal of who a priest is. I'm thinking maybe, like, proof. might be one, but still like that's about like the idea of like, is this guy up to something nefarious? And while that is the premise of this show on the surface, Hamish Linklater's performance here is so good. And it made me like want to be like, oh, wait, priests are just people who like really want to talk to you, who are really interested in these questions, like a rabbi would be, and have like dedicated themselves in their lives and like sacrificed a lot to just sort of meditate on these questions and have conversations with people. So I think this is the first time I was ever like, would I like a priest? Would I like to hang out with one? Would they have an interesting conversation thing to offer?
And I'm sure you've dealt with it online when someone like says some dumb shit at or about you, and you respond once, and they immediately backtrack and they apologize, and they like. I imagine, I'm not going to say 80, but I'll say like 60 to 70% of these absolute assholes are of that spectrum. So even if we take 50% of those in real life, that gives us 30 to 35% of people that suck. That might just need a conversation. Like that might just be like, let's have a little talk. Let's see if we can see eye to eye. We might not see eye to eye in everything, but it might be more of a Venn diagram than you thought. And I think this show really did that for me on a religious scale, on a theological scale. That's not a word, but theology scale on the macro. And it helped me like open my eyes to be more open to having discourse. And I think online, especially with both those being online presences, that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll sort of wrap it up here, but I will say that this whole show really, at the end of the day, I think is about a man not trying to sell religion on anybody. Like the main character of this show, for the majority of the show, is an atheist after a terrible incident that he goes through. And it's about the priest having a conversation with this man and not trying to push him towards religion, not trying to even make him see the world his way, but just trying to like be there for him and be his friend and you know, support him and sort of do that on a community level. And I think at the end of the day, like that's the most beautiful sentiment for what a religious leader could be. It even implies at some point that Jesus Christ might have been turned into a vampire, that's what exactly this cave did, and what this entity was the thing that rose Jesus from the dead. And at no point does that come off as like an offensive idea, because like this is just, it's also like an angel. It is also like what you make of it. It is just something that is divine in the sense that it is outside of our understanding of it. And
my last point before we boogie is there's been this late like the last 2 days on Twitter, this thing offended me personally about Midnight Mass, and I think it's really important. I noticed it was trending, and there was this whole like discourse about like art and interpretation. And my 2 cents on that I think is really, in my opinion, just my take, is not all art is for everyone. And if it was, it wouldn't be art. Like we need to receive art that impacts us. So the fact that you were able to get that beautiful message out of this, I think is huge. The fact that I was able to watch something that was so heavily religion based that I generally would struggle with means this was art made for us. Just because it's not for you doesn't mean it's for no one. And I think it's really important we stop thinking the world is built for us, because the world can't be. Because, we're the lead of our own movie, but like a lot of people are watching their own movies. So don't be a dick to others while also finding the merit in art. Yeah.
And steer away from any generalization. This is all good. This is all bad. This is all evil. I might have not liked a certain movie. Yeah, right. I'm bad at the end. This is why I'm not good at tweeting, folks. I only do it at 4 a.m. and it's always just subjective takes about equilibrium being crazy. Coy, where can people find you when you're not talking about religion and Midnight Mass and Mike Flanagan?
You can find me at Coy Jandreau here and on Instagram and on Twitter and on TikTok, because I love TikTok. It's probably my favorite social media since MySpace. It is my exact jam because that algorithm knows me better than I know myself. And you can find me on YouTube, and I've got a podcast. Basically, if you type my name in, you'll find podcasts, YouTubes, all sorts of social media, because I don't know where Coy Jandreau ends and at Coy Jandreau begins, because I think I spend more hours digitally than analog. So does that mean I'm more digitally real than analog real? And other questions I ask myself far too often. I mean, strap in. It's a weird social media.
I mean, I'm assuming you've seen Black Mirror, or maybe you haven't. Have you seen Black Mirror on Netflix?
I've seen a decent amount, and it definitely like... that and a decent amount of mushroom shapes my worldview, I gotta say. Oof.
The John Hamm episode shook I was too high when I watched that episode about like cookies and like the whole concept of your like digital self being like the eternal whatever.
You
can find me.
Gambino fan?
Sorry?
Are you a Childish Gambino fan?
Pretty much, yeah. But I'm not super into things that aren't musicals. But that's a whole other conversation.
That's honest. There's an album called Because of the Internet that you can listen to it as just like a fun hip hop album, but there's also a script that goes along with it, and there's also an entire third way to listen to it, which is basically about we became gods as soon as we invented the concept of creating a different version of ourselves, right? God is a creator of life. So because the internet is about the inception of the internet made us all gods, so our avatars, our separate selves we created, are their own entities. And it's this insane concept album, like that rivals Dark Side of the Moon for me, about what it means to be alive right now, and everyone should like dissect it.
God, I wish we had another minute because I'm going to say where I'm from, but I just found the end speech from this, the end speech that Katie Siegel gives, and it is so beautiful, and it is just about how we are all God in the moment of death. We realize or remember, maybe not God, but we all remember at the moment of death that we have always been and always will be part of the universe, and we have just, and our self sort of fades away, and our remembrance of being this entity or being part of the cosmic whole. And then we think about how we like forgot about it. And then we remind ourselves that we will forget it again. And so it almost ties into like the Hindu idea or like the idea of reincarnation is just so beautiful. Goddamn beautiful, folks. Check it out. Or God bless beautiful, rather. You can find me over at Videodrew. You're on this channel. So please like, subscribe, comment, rate, whatever. Also, check out Content Candy. It's a new podcast network. So you can find that at Apple, Stitcher, Anchor, wherever you want. It has a bunch of podcasts, some of which are exclusive to audio format. So that's got Garmin Shozia with me and Lon Harris, the Video Chronicles with me and NerdChronic. We have a long midnight mass review that's up, and we're about to do one on Squid Game, which is awesome. Otherwise my Patreon's patreon.com/Videodrew. You can sign up, become a fun member with a bunch of perks, including, by the way, guys, the little after show that we do after this. So thank you, Coy, for being on. I appreciate it. I know this is a little bit of a down day, but I really appreciate you coming on and talking about the show, because I saw your tweet and I was like, Coy's not into horror movies. Coy like this. This is exactly who I want to talk to about this.
It is impressive how anti this type of content I usually am in multiple ways, and how this got me in all the right ways. This made my top 10 bits of art of the year, and it's not in any way my shit. So it's like, that's how good this is. So if you need a sell on this after all these spoilers, it's the opposite of my usual world, and I loved all of it.
Yeah. Now I just kind of want to make you a playlist of other good horror that deals with like theoreticals and stuff like that. But that's
if you have any other feel good horror like Lost Boys or Cabin in the Woods, that's
there is feel good horror. There's actually some beautiful feel good horror. I feel like weirdly Ouija Origin of Evil is one of his that is a feel good horror ultimately. But there's a lot more. Let me think on that.
I'm looking for the Ted Lasso of horror. Help me out.
Yeah. I feel like we can get you there. I feel like NerdChronic might have some suggestions too. But thank you guys for joining us. I will see you next time in 2 weeks. And until then, bye.